Hi, folks. Most people never talk about the most important crisis facing our civilization today. While we hear a lot about the related issue of climate change, few people discuss peak oil or even know what it is. Given the implications of peak oil, this really concerns me. So I will give a brief description of peak oil before I explain why it represents such a problem for humanity. About a half century ago, M. King Hubbert, a geologist working for Shell Oil, realized that at some point every oil well peaked in its production. A well starts off pumping slowly, gradually reaches a peak in output, and then declines. This phenomenon occurs on the individual level for wells, but also for oil fields and entire nations. Hubbert predicted the United States would peak in oil production in the mid-70s. His predictions came true, and we had an oil crisis. He predicted that at some point this would happen for the entire world. This means the day will come when we have a far greater demand for oil than we have a supply. This will have major economic and political consequences that will make oil prohibitively expensive to use for all the things we currently use it for. It means that unless we find other ways to power our civilization, people will fight over the last of these resources. By many estimates, we might have already reached peak oil. According to the Hirsch Report, a study commissioned by the U.S. Department of Energy, conventional oil extraction peaked in 2005. Since then, we have had to rely more and more on hard-to-obtain fossil fuels like tar sands, deep-sea drilling, and shale and oil gas. These fuels take a lot more energy and resources to get out of the ground than conventional fossil fuels, and therefore have a much lower energy return on energy invested, or EROEI. Peak oil does not mean we will reach a point where we take all of these resources out of the ground. Long before that could happen, there will come a point where the demand for them becomes so much higher than the supply that they become prohibitively expensive to use and extract. Even though this will happen over a long period of time, it has serious implications for our economy and way of life. Why does this pose such a huge problem for us? I don't think most people appreciate how much our industrial civilization relies on cheap fossil fuels. Literally, every piece of technology and infrastructure we have runs on some kind of fossil fuel. It is the blood of our economy. Everything we use today depends on cheap fossil fuels. Our transportation and infrastructure system relies on it. This seems the most obvious. Our agriculture system depends on both chemical fertilizers and pesticides made possible by cheap fossil fuels, as well as quick, cheap, sometimes climate-controlled transport to get food to faraway markets, all powered by cheap fossil fuels. Our manufactured products rely on fossil fuels supplying factories with cheap power. One of the reasons companies can exploit cheap labor in other countries comes from the relatively low cost of moving goods using fossil fuels. The internet relies on both huge supplies of energy and massive amounts of resources made possible by fossil fuels. A server farm, of which there are many, uses as much energy as a small city. Every day, a truckload of busted hardware moves out of these facilities, and a truckload of new equipment moves in. Again, cheap fossil fuels make the manufacture and transport of this equipment cheap enough to allow the many benefits we get from the internet. Not to mention the energy that goes into manufacturing and powering the devices we use ourselves. We'd like to think we can solve any problem with technology, but all our technologies today rely on fossil fuels, even our renewable ones. All our technologies rely on fossil fuels for their manufacture, to power them, and to transport them to market. Our technological powers come as much from the raw power of fossil fuels as they do from our ingenuity. Many of the most lauded developments merely represent a task we have thrown huge amounts of energy and other resources at. Now I can hear some people saying that peak oil has been disproved. I find this assertion highly comical. Yes, some peak oil proponents have made bad predictions about how this phenomenon will affect us. They predicted that peak oil would cause a drastic crisis years ago, or they claimed that oil prices would soar when at the moment they remain rather low. The fact that some of these people made bad predictions does not disprove peak oil. In order to do that, you would have to prove you can extract a finite resource from a finite planet indefinitely. If you believe that you can get an infinite amount of a finite resource out of a finite planet, you are either insane, stupid, or a mainstream economist. I could go into the economics of why we have low oil prices at the moment, but that requires a long, complicated explanation of the way oil markets and finance work. I might deal with the topic in a future video, but for now, I will leave some links on the subject for you to check out on your own. People who deny the existence of peak oil insist we will create better methods of extraction that will allow us to get to more oil, ignoring the fact that no matter how good we get at extracting oil does not change the fact that we have a finite supply of it. It also ignores the fact that these new extraction technologies use much more energy and resources and therefore have a much lower EROEI, that is, energy return on energy invested. Ultimately, it ignores the fact that we tap these new resources precisely because we have, for the most part, extracted all the easy-to-get-to oil. I can hear some other people saying not to worry because we will soon be able to power everything we have now using renewables. I have my doubts about this. I certainly favor replacing fossil fuels with renewable energy sources and think we should keep as much oil, gas, and coal in the ground as possible. But renewables have limits, and despite great advances in the efficiency of wind, solar, and energy storage, these technologies still have qualities that make it unlikely we can transition to them and keep using as much energy as we currently use. This requires an entire video, which I plan to make in the future, so I'll just give an overview for the moment. Renewable energy is incredibly diffuse. It can do a lot of things, but we can't use it in the same way we use extremely energy-dense fossil fuels. We can't just replace coal power plants with solar panels and call it a day. In order to make use of renewable energy, we need to accept its limitations and adapt to them instead of trying to make it do what fossil fuels do for us. The first limitation comes from the fact that the sun does not shine all the time, nor does the wind blow constantly. This means that powering our electrical grid, to say nothing of our vehicles, would require vast amounts of solar panels or wind turbines to concentrate this energy. Since the times we use energy do not match the times when we collect it, we need storage, which presents a problem. When you store energy, you lose it in the conversion process. You lose it in the retrieval process. You lose it when you transmit it. The batteries used to store energy rely on rare earth minerals. As the name implies, these minerals are scarce, at least in forms that we can easily and affordably extract them. We could use other methods for storing this energy, but these involve large infrastructure projects, which also require lots of energy, resources, and political will to build. In addition to this, renewable technologies rely on fossil fuels for their manufacture. Solar panels require incredibly hot furnaces that can't really run on electricity. The mining equipment used to extract minerals needed for these technologies runs on fossil fuel, at least for the parts of the extraction done by machine. In the Congo, they use small children for a lot of the work, which of course bothers us for some other reasons. If you want to make mining equipment electric, okay, but now you need to use even more of those rare earth minerals to make the batteries for this equipment. Think about the amount of rare earth minerals you would need for the battery of a vehicle like this. Remember that we can only take so much of this material out of the ground each year, and that we currently already use most of it for our electronics. These are just some of the challenges involved in transitioning to renewable energy that we need to think about more. If you would like some more information on the subject, you can check out some of the links I have in the description from the Post-Carbon Institute. The transition requires us rethinking how we use energy for electricity, manufacturing, transportation, heating, and cooling. It ultimately means we will need to use much less energy than we currently do. And now we have come to the reason we don't hear about peak oil often. Nobody, no matter where they land on the political spectrum, wants to tell people they have to use less energy. It is political suicide. Remember how people reacted when Jimmy Carter told people to put on a sweater instead of turning up the heat? Okay, YouTube viewers are pretty young, so maybe you don't remember that, but trust me, it happened. You can go look it up. People don't want to hear this, but they must. In order to meet this challenge, we must change the way we live and adapt to the limits of renewable energy sources. This will require not only changes to our technologies and our economy, but also changes to our culture. While this certainly means a major shift, we need not concentrate on what we will give up and can instead look to what we will gain. Now, I can hear some other people saying right now, they will think of something. Maybe. I hope they do. But at the moment, they have not. Do we want to bet our future that they will? If you read certain publications, you might have a skewed view of what we can achieve. I have lost track of how many times someone has claimed that some new technology that they can barely make work in a lab will make it to market and revolutionize energy production. To bank on these seems reckless to me. The promoters of fusion power, for instance, have insisted for decades that we will have cheap commercial fusion in 50 years. Yet we have not gotten any closer to producing a sustained fusion reaction in the laboratory, let alone harnessing this energy. The only advance I have seen on this front is that some fusion promoters now claim we will have the technology in 7 to 15 years. So I guess we can count that as progress. Instead of always being 50 years in the future, fusion will forever be 15 years in the future. At this point, some people might say that we just need to go with traditional nuclear fission power plants. Again, it would take an entire video to describe all the things wrong with nuclear power. I will probably make that video in the future, but for now, I will just say that building more nuclear power plants would be incredibly fucking stupid. But back to the topic at hand. Try to imagine the political and economic turmoil that will occur as we have less and less energy available. Has this already started to happen? Did the 2008 crash owe anything to the peak of conventional oil production in 2005? Though we can only speculate, it seems it could be possible. Hollywood has ingrained in us the idea of disasters unfolding quickly. But Rome did not fall in a day. This process could take decades, or even centuries, to fully play out, with sudden jolts to the system followed by periods of relative stability. I have known about peak oil for some time, but the thinker who has informed my view on this the most in recent years is John Michael Greer, who talks about a long descent. My videos on peak oil and related topics will draw heavily from things he wrote in his old blog, the Hirsch Report. I will put a link to an archive of this site in the description, as well as a link to his new blog. You can also find him in print. He has written loads of nonfiction books and even a bit of fiction. Peak oil presents an incredible challenge. A challenge that most people don't even know exists, and that we need to start thinking about a lot more if we want to avoid serious political and economic catastrophes. I plan to talk a lot more about how we meet those challenges in future videos. But for now, thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you really like what I do, please contribute to my Patreon or make a PayPal donation. I also have some t-shirts for sale. They feature the major arcana of the tarot deck that you find decorating my channel. For this video, I have used the Tower of Destruction. They are available in different colors and styles, unisex, women tees, long sleeve. I have links to all this and citations in the description. I'm Greg Belvedere. Remember, all generalizations are stupid, so never speak in absolutes. See you next time.